Throughout this video series, we've claimed that the origins of world mythology, ancient symbolism, and magical rites lie in human memories of extraordinary natural events. It was from the emerging commemorative practices that the ancient civilizations themselves arose. And so we've repeatedly emphasized that the reconstruction offered here is far too specific to allow us to make up stories or to make up explanations. The evidence will either be there in the unique detail that the reconstruction demands, or it will not be there. Our explanation lies in a congregation of planets gathered close to the Earth long before the rise of observational astronomy, and that means before any of these bodies were even named as planets. We've called this celestial formation the polar configuration, and we've identified many of its varying forms as electric discharge activity between these bodies. Extraordinary events in the sky provoked an explosion of human imagination, now discoverable as story content within every ancient culture. In the course of these presentations, it should also become clear that no archetype, no global theme, could ever be explained by natural events in our own time. Things occurring today provide no reference whatsoever. The impact of this human experience requires that we follow the instincts of a detective, noting things too consistently out of place. And we must never forget that the more unusual the detail, the more compelling is the improbable convergence of testimony. Our claim is that the link of the mythic archetypes to the evolution of the polar configuration requires that we uncover the concrete reference beneath the imaginative symbols. Amongst the cross-cultural points of agreement is the repeated identity of the mother goddess as the planet Venus. This identity is not just worth following. It is a window to a mind-altering human experience, a story that reverberated through history for thousands of years. The paradoxical identity of the mother goddess with life itself, her role as the great protectress, but also as a world destroyer, can only be explained at the level of concrete origins beneath that symbolism. The discharged streamers of Venus, an effusion of mythic power and glory, were the animating life of heaven, seen in mythic terms as the luminous heart and soul of the universal power we've identified as Saturn. But the connection runs in two directions, since the discharging sphere of Venus was also interpreted as the protective shield of the warrior god named as Mars, who occupied the impenetrable spot, as if protected from the sky-darkening clouds or celestial armies of chaos. When the heavens fell into disorder, the sky itself became a mythic battlefield. Swarms of debris, seen as rebelling hordes, appeared to overtake the world. It was in this context that the most active and spectacular form of the goddess emerged, affecting every ancient culture's ideas about the meaning of war, conquest, and magical defense. But was the goddess a divine weapon launched against rebelling powers? Or was she herself the provocation, the feared destroyer of cosmic order? Human imagination would stand in competition for millennia, but more fundamental than the interpretation was the underlying event. And our purpose here is to see the events through the lens of global patterns. Ironically, it is the competing interpretations that confirm both the patterns and the events that provoked them. Confirmation comes wherever, without the underlying event, the global patterns would not be conceivable, not even be possible. In the presence of the goddess's visible power, enemies were scattered. Dark clouds of chaos gave way to a blast of fire and light. The rebelling hordes of heaven fled from its onslaught. One of the most dramatic illustrations of this archetypal theme is the Egyptian legend called the destruction of mankind. The myth says that the primeval sun god Ra had grown aged and perhaps a bit weary of humanity. It recounts how in that remote time the children of Ra had rebelled against the god. In response to the rebellion, Ra sent out his powerful eye to take vengeance on a disrespectful world. The agent of the conflagration that followed was the goddess Sekhmet. Not just a goddess, Sekhmet was the far-famed eye of Ra, the Utshit, the giver of life and the great protectress, the very heart and soul of the primeval sun himself. Enigmatically, Sekhmet also possessed both a leonine and a serpentine form, a remarkable parallel to the Sumerian Venus goddess Inanna, who displayed the same forms in her role as the terrifying radiance in the center of the god On, the overarching ruler of the sky. This is no coincidence. These mythic forms reveal no relationship whatsoever to today's sky, but they are not accidental, not random, and they direct our attention to the archetype of the great comet, the human experience from which the female comet archetype descended. The comet is the eye, heart, and soul of a great king. Comet is a star with disordered hair or leonine mane. Comet is a cosmic serpent. And the comet as a sign or an agent of world destruction. And so we find a remarkable juxtaposition of comet attributes in the titles of the Egyptian goddess Sekhmet, called the beautiful eye of the primeval sun. She was the great flame, or flaming one, the destroyer by fire, the destroyer of rebellions, the ruler of serpents, and the ruler of lions. Strangely, all of the well-documented goddesses in Egypt were, like Sekhmet, called the Eye of Ra, suggesting an underlying identity entirely outside natural experience today. And no goddess figure in ancient Egypt tells this story of the sun god's eye more vividly than Sekhmet, whose very name derives from the root Quem, signifying a blast of glory or majesty, the essential character of the eye goddess. Sekhmet entered the conflagration displaying a trail of fire. The texts say, "Behold me, men and gods, I have come into being as the Lady of glorious appearings. My flame is behind me." It is a flame which drives away on its account. The tip of its flame crosses the land from the sky. No one at all can approach her. The streams behind her are flames of fire. In fact, the Egyptian traditions constitute a remarkable parallel to Sumerian descriptions of a world in fear and trembling at the tempestuous radiance of Inanna, identified as Venus. In precisely the same way, Sekhmet appeared as a flame of fire in her tempest, instilling terror on earth and threatening to destroy the world. "I am mistress of the flame," the goddess announces. "The fear of me is in their hearts, and the awe of me is in their hearts." The flame makes his enemies fall. It is a flame moving before the wind of the sky to the end of the earth. Surely it is no coincidence that the great flame in heaven, taking the form of a fiery serpent, found its symbolic place on the crown of kings in Egypt, exactly as we've seen in ancient Mesopotamia. It was the headgear of the king that reflected the protective role of the explosive majesty most dramatically. In later times, when Egyptian armies confronted foreign nations, these peoples were seen as barbarians outside the gate. They were the terrestrial counterparts of the primeval chaos fiends. And so the king invariably called upon the shining majesty of Ra, remembering how the eye goddess in her rage had destroyed rebelling powers in the sky in former times. In considering this theme, the critical steps will require comparative analysis of an incontrovertible historical pattern. The ancient story of the goddess as the explosive glory of heaven was the story of the great comet. In this experience, we find the origins of the astronomical language and symbolism of comets around the world. There is no other explanation. And so, too, the attributes of the celestial glory are the defining attributes of the planet Venus as Mother Goddess. And as we continue our series, this truth can be verified in the astronomical lexicon of every well-documented culture in ancient times. In their essential details, the global story of the great comet is the story of the planet Venus.